Welcome everyone to the second training session from MUNers Across Borders. We're very happy to welcome you today on UN Human Rights Day to talk about accessibility, inclusion, diversity and equality, which is a very, very important topic in model UN. And many people have their own ways of looking at it, but we have a suggestion of how we can help improve this that could be mainstreamed across all simulations. Today's session is being run, like last one, by our incredible training officer, Ciara Campbell, who is based in Ireland and worked both in human rights and indeed on simulations. So she's the absolute perfect person. And joining us today is also Uni, the director of our community. So Ciara, over to you. And we'll be popping in back and forth across the training session as and when Ciara wants us to. Thank you very much.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Philippe. And welcome everyone to this training simulation, which I am very excited to present to you. So today we'll be discussing AIDE, which is accessibility, inclusion, diversity, and equality. Now, I just have to give a legal disclaimer at the start that all of this is just guidance and shouldn't be taken as any legal guidance in any way. And that also we have further written resources available to our members. So please get in contact via email or look on our website for any further information. So let's begin. So to make effective decisions, different viewpoints are required. A model simulation is a celebration of international relations and a crossroads where people from many different backgrounds meet. Nationality, race, disability, sexuality, religion, age, gender. All participants and organizers should feel welcome and that their voice is heard. For example, this call, we have many people from different countries, and they are all welcome and their voice will be heard. So, what is a model simulation? A model simulation is a simulation of a decision-making body, and that can be an international institution, for example, the United Nations, the European Union, NATO, African Union. Participants take up the roles of characters within a fictional scenario, which could have happened, may happen in the future, or are a historical event. And these are usually done as an educational tool, or as training for negotiation. However, what makes them really special and interesting in terms of our purpose today is that these conferences can take place in so many different formats, from a high school club to a university setting to an international event, that there's so many different requirements of AIDE to consider. And so, why is AIDE important? Well, it's a fundamental viewpoint of our modern age to mainstream human rights concerns, especially on Human Rights Day. However, also, a fundamental part of what we're going to discuss is equality and access to participation. And there are often barriers to participation for people who are either marginalized, disadvantaged, or sidelined. And we're going to discuss today how you can effectively plan your conference to ensure that it is inclusive as possible and accounting for all many different types of concerns. And this means that your conference is going to have the best type of viewpoints and arguments, because there's going to be so many different types of viewpoints, because everyone has been included and their voice can be heard. So, but what is the meaning of AIDE, you might ask? Apart from being a cry for help, it is also broken down into 4 letters. So the first of them is accessibility, and that means providing access to participation, whether that be accessibility requirements for people with physical disabilities, such as captioning, sign languages, large text, rented areas, ramps and wide doors, or ensuring accessible eligibility criteria for participants, in the sign-up form, in the recruitment. And then inclusion, it means that people from all backgrounds are welcome and no one is excluded based on their socioeconomic background, and that their voices are heard. So it's not just like it's a all boys school or all girls school. This conference is for everyone. And then that their voices are heard means that they don't just sit there silently, but that everyone really gets an equal chance to speak and to voice their own argument or opinion on what is being discussed. So, diversity. It means that among the participants and organizing team, not one specific type of person dominates, but that there is a diversity of nationality, race, sexuality, and class, among other types. Now, this will differ depending on the location, depending on how many participants there are. But essentially what it means is that there isn't just one type of person dominating, but there is a diversity. And then we come to the final one, which is equality. And this means that everyone is treated in an equitable manner according to their needs. And that's a little bit different from treating everyone in an equal manner, where you just give everyone the exact same, because there are people in society who will need different things because of the background they have, all the other demographic requirements that we discussed. And so equality really means that everyone is treated according to their needs in an equitable manner. So, you've learned a little about what exactly AIDE is. How are we going to get it into the conference? And stage one is planning. Plan, plan, plan. It is the most important and essential part of organizing a conference. So right from the very beginning of the conference planning stages, when you're creating your idea, when you're figuring out what is my conference going to look like, there are a few strategies and policies that you should be considering. So in the first stage is creating a diversity and inclusion strategy. And this will cover your entire year-long process of organizing a conference. It'll outline the steps for every stage and what you want to achieve, what you're going to do, and it'll be your roadmap for you to follow. Another step of how to mainstream it into your pre-conference planning is to create a sexual harassment or assault policy. That is a very delicate area, and I won't go too much into detail in it here because there are further resources on the internet. There are guidelines to follow, but it is definitely an area where it would be good to have a policy and to make participants aware of that during the recruitment process. The same goes for no tolerance bullying policy. A policy should be created, and all participants and organizers should be aware of all the policies before the conference begins. It's just like school all over again. I don't know about you guys, but no tolerance of bullying was very prominent in my school, and I think we were all better off for it. So, you've done the first of all, the planning stage. The second of all is the elements in just before you start the participant recruitment and organizing, which is booking accessible accommodation. And this is a very wide scope of what accessible accommodation means. It may involve just having lifts or elevators in the building. It may involve, for example, as you see in the picture here, having wheelchair accessible accommodation. And further consideration should be given to this. Obviously, it has to be an area which is, within the limits of where where your other venues are, but all efforts should be made to book accessible accommodation. And then in your actual sign-up form for the conference, you really have to mainstream the diversity and inclusion into that by ensuring that there's many different points for demographic details, but also noting that these details aren't going to be kept, that their data will be protected, but it's purely for the process of organizing and ensuring that everyone's needs are accounted for. And for example, you might want to understand, okay, do you have a disability that we have to provide support for? Do you have any dietary needs, any urgent allergies? These elements are really crucial. So, Uni, Philippe, do you have any comments at this stage?
I just, if I want to say, I think the strategy is very important. And what I always like to say is that, while the plan that, eventually might come out maybe is not quite the one that maybe best, the planning, even just the thought process of trying to make a strategy, looking at best practices is really, really essential. Here, I do want to highlight perhaps a few resources. A lot of very good American conferences have done quite a lot of work on diversity and inclusion. The US itself does a lot of work on making sure accessibility is mainstreamed, and they have a lot of their policies online. So definitely look at them. I believe Best Delegate is a good example of where they would share items related to it, and I think that having a look at what other conferences have done is a good way to look at how you could model yours. But equally, don't just rely on them. And don't just copy them for the sake of having them. Really do think about them. Think about the spaces you're going to be interacting with. And if there's one thing I can just say, and this is perhaps helpful for some, not for others, but putting yourself in the shoes and imagining it from the perspective of people who will be differently abled, will perceive things differently at the conference, is also a good way to kind of imagine and build that strategy. Because at the end of the day, it's all about trying to incorporate and help those from a range of walks of life and backgrounds. And that's not always going to be your own. And as a white man as well, I think it's one where we have to do a lot of thinking about that. And it's never going to be absolutely perfect, but the planning of it is really a key part of it. Even though the plan itself, might be different, I would encourage you all to spend a bit of time on that before continuing. Thanks for the opportunity, Ciara.
Great, thank you. Uni, any comments?
Yeah, I think I obviously agree with everything Philippe just said, but I also think it's important to, in addition to looking at resources that already exist, look around in your community and the people around the organization that you're organizing a conference for, and try to involve people with different backgrounds in the planning process as well. If you have an organizing team with people who have a same socioeconomic background, same gender, etc., and then try to make an effort to reach out to people who might experience the world a bit differently and hear what they would like to see in a conference, accessibility-wise and inclusion-wise, because it is very varied. And we have picture here of a wheelchair, and of course that is one side of accessibility, but it's also a lot more than that. So yeah.
Thank you very much. And now we will continue. So, pre-conference recruitment. There's a few different stages to this. So the first one is advertising. And when you're advertising for your conference, do ensure that you're not just advertising to the typical places, but really make an effort to widen your advertising to a real range of places, including, for example, people who didn't go to university, people who are already of working age out in the community, people who aren't in the capital city, and not just to target the areas you know very well. And this might ensure that people who wouldn't traditionally have seen the advertisement will see it and perhaps might be interested in going to the conference. The second step is application streams, and this is another element to consider, as in you would have, let's say, 3 different types of application streams, and one stream is for everyone. But there are 2 other streams, for example, people from a working class background or people from a background of ethnic minorities. And this is to help with the application bias, where perhaps their application might be judged against other applications, and unconscious bias can really affect people when they're judging these applications. But if they have streams just for themselves, then that helps to ensure greater participation and in recruitment and participation into the conference. The third element is really, really interesting, and I would encourage you all to consider it if you have the funding, and that is scholarship funding for people from financially disadvantaged backgrounds, so that they are going to be able to participate in the conference. And this means that, if someone is from a working class background, or for example, they are working while they're in university, or they're someone who isn't working, and there are a range of situations why someone might not be able to afford the money to attend, especially if it's international. And I also want to note that if you're having an international conference, it may be that you're seeking recruitment and participants from a country where the currency exchange is very sharp, and so that they are not spending the equivalent to other participants. They are in fact spending much more, and that is another element to consider. Especially if your conference is in a city or a country with a very high cost of living. There's so much more that just goes beyond the participation fee, the accommodation fee. It's the eating out in restaurants. It's the buying transport around the city. All these elements add up. And so that is why I would encourage you to consider scholarship funding for financially disadvantaged, so that they can consider applying and going through the process of recruitment, and in the end have a really rewarding experience which they would not have been able to have otherwise. And it could really change their life forever. You never know. So, and then in the recruitment process as well, there's all the parts of participant support. So, number 1, for example, if you are recruiting internationally, there may be people who will require visa letters. And what you can do is reach out as an organizer and ask them, do you need any help with the visas? Is there anything that we can provide for you? Do you need letters proving that you are going to attend this conference? The second part is preparation packs, which should be for everyone. And it's really crucial to include in these maps or instructions of how to get around the city, and lists of really crucial numbers, which might be local doctors, local hospitals, local police, any kind of emergency numbers which they might need in a foreign city, or any kind of notice of here are these laws or rules or cultural norms which we don't permit here, or which you will have to abide by, so that no one gets into any kind of trouble while they're traveling. For example, if you're under 21 and you're attending an American conference, you're not allowed to drink alcohol, but you might already be of age to drink alcohol back home. And that's one part where participants would have to be made aware of how the laws differ between jurisdictions. The third part is interesting, and it's translation. In an international conference, although there will be one language shared by everyone, it may not be everyone's mother tongue, and there may be varying levels of proficiency. To ensure inclusion, it may be a good idea to allow for translation of some crucial documents into other languages. But I also really like the idea that when you're simulating an international institution, for example, the European Union, it has free working languages. So it might be an idea to provide translation into those free working languages. Or for the UN, it has 6. It might be a little less doable in a model UN salary to provide for those translations, but I think it would be a fun process almost to try and be as realistic to the institution as possible. So, any comments from Uni or Philippe on stage 2?
You want to go first this time?
Yeah, one thing that came to mind with the language, not strictly about translation, but I always appreciate when organizers in an international setting where the participants speak a lot of different languages, where they encourage participants to speak the common language, for example, English, especially in social settings, like outside of the program, so that people don't feel excluded just because they arrive at an international setting with a different language.
I think in terms of language as well, one thing that I think about with applications is, and again, this happens from a very male perspective, but just the tone and the language of the applications is almost male oriented. Looking for a superstar, looking for one of the classics in coding and engineering is like when they say looking for a ninja at coding. And I think this is all very fun language, but it does also it's not clear for one thing. And it is kind of, in many senses, coded for a specific group, and rarely one that helps those who might be interested in attending otherwise. So yes, for the advertisement, I think that's a really, really important one.
And it's not only about gender, it's also
about gender,
what socioeconomic background you want to attract, and all sorts of things.
Absolutely. And with scholarship funding, I mean, it's rare, but it's growing in terms of conferences who are looking for it. What I would say is if you're ever looking to get, again, in terms of resources, scholarship funding and your funding difficulties, if you're at a university, talk to the university, because, sometimes universities have short-term funding programs that are normally for their summer schools, but they could equally apply to a youth-led activity at the university. And I've seen that happen in France, for example, which was very successful. There were some Moroccan students who came over who'd have never had the opportunity otherwise, and it was really quite powerful for them. And equally, your local council or your local government, equally, they have small pots of funding to try and improve the standing of where the town is, the standing of the location, and they can be quite helpful too. And if you do manage to do that, that really makes your conference stand out. The point of all of this is not just for marketing, absolutely, but equally, when we do see it, I think it's good to highlight it. And so those are also a few resources. Hope that helps, Ciara. Thank you.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much, Philippe. Okay. And thank you as well, Uni. So after those wonderful comments, we are going to move on to the most crucial element, actually, of the entire process is during the conference itself. So there are a few different considerations to have. The most important one is having a safe person or a signpost person. And this person should be one of the organizers, and it should be decided on during the diversity strategy at the very beginning who this person is. And they will be someone who either participants or organizers can come to with any complaints about discriminatory behavior or accessibility issues or any infringements of the policies, so that they can take those concerns in a very confidential and secure way, and then follow the policy and the procedures to handle them in an appropriate manner during the conference. And so this means that this has to be someone who doesn't have too much on their plate and has the emotional skills to really handle sensitive situations. So please consider that very carefully. But it is deeply essential, as it is during the social part of the conference, both in the interactions after hours, at bars, at restaurants, in the accommodation, where incidents may occur that make people feel unsafe, or disagreements or cultural clashes may occur. And in order to protect everyone, it is really important to consider having a safe person who can deal with any incidents that occur. Also during the conference, it should be really necessary that when everyone is in a foreign country or in even a foreign city, or if you're organizing a high school conference for minors, there are a lot of child safety procedures that have to be considered, is to have an updated live location and a schedule that are shared regularly in a communications platform that everyone can access. And what this means is that if anyone does get lost, that they will be able to find where the rest of the group is, and they will be able to say, okay, we're here in the schedule, so everyone should be at this location. There will be times when the group splits up and people go off to explore the city. But the problem is if someone is lost or missing or has gotten themselves into a situation in any way, that their absence is noted. And then we come on to the third element, which is the roll call at the start of every meeting. And definitely in MEU circles, this is, a funny little joke and tradition. And it really is essential for ensuring that, okay, we make fun of people who come in late. But if there's anyone missing for hours and hours, their absence will be noted. And whether or not it's an intentional absence can be discovered. It may vary depending on the model simulation, how feasible this is. For example, if you have a European Parliament of 200 people, one person going missing may be less easily noticed. But that's almost why it's important for, every little group to have a roll call of like, okay, are all our members here? They are? Okay, good. That's sorted. And then during the social events, the planning of that does have to be done very carefully, and all possible cultural disagreements have to really be considered when you're organizing the venue, when you're considering the participants and where they're placed, just to ensure that everyone is accounted for. For example, if you have an entire conference of vegetarians, like they're debating the European Green Deal, and every single one of them is vegetarian. Would you book a barbecue steakhouse for them to eat at? No, because they would probably be offended. Like, you brought them to somewhere where they can only eat meat. And as a vegetarian, I would be deeply sad and go off to look for another venue. And as an organizer, you may not wish to experience that. So that's why during the planning, you have to take into account your participants' different needs or requirements when you're organizing all the socials. However, all these steps are just to ensure that you will have a fun and safe conference where everyone is included. And ideally, during the conference is really going to be the high point, because you're going to get this real melting pot of all these different viewpoints and cultures, and everyone's going to learn so much from each other about the state of the world and be discussing really important ideas. And you'll just feel this sense in yourself of, wow, isn't doing model simulations fantastic? I'm never going to stop. Okay. So, Philippe, Uni, any comments on during the conference? Any experiences or examples that you can share?
I've definitely got a couple. I mean, having run a few conferences, been SecGen for a couple, um, being a point of contact is a really important one. And I think additionally, I appreciated I wasn't the best point of contact for everything. I think we had two or three who were there and available. Again, there was myself, perhaps, dealing with the overarching issues, but there was also a colleague of mine who presented as female, and she did get a couple of people come to her about issues to do with health and safety, which didn't really feel comfortable going to me about, which is absolutely fair. And I think that was a good example. And we checked in our case as well. I think this is good to note as well. In some conferences, there might be delegations. And the delegations and the delegation head sometimes is asked or will be the person you go to resolve some issues, to signpost or issues that delegates are raising. And it's always important to do that with diplomacy. They never want to feel like they are being kept in the dark about what's happening to their delegates. But equally, if it is something the delegates want to share with them, then you do have to respect that too. A second example is from a conference in Egypt. And I think, it's a conference with a lot of diversity. And that one was one where, for example, as you mentioned, Ciara, the sort of religious, and there was an aspect of ethnic also differences was quite important and well respected. And I found it, very impressive. They were to go out of the way to make sure everyone was comfortable. And for those who hadn't been as well to Cairo, and Cairo is a gigantic city, a very chaotic city, they did a great job as well of making sure the directions were sorted. The people didn't really go alone when they were at the conference, and always had at least someone from the city or the area with them. And that's usually sometimes the easiest thing. Even if it's just delegates, making sure there's one person who knows the city really can help. And if I can just mention as well, some fairly basic things, but if you are dealing with minors, do keep in mind that the requirements to work with minors in conferences, A, it varies from state to state, but B, from country to country, but B, there are some very maybe common sense, but important to keep in mind. Never leave them alone one-on-one with any individual for almost any reason. Always make sure that there are multiple people around them, and there's additional responsibilities. Much of this can be looked up online. There are sort of quite general but good handbooks and guidelines for it. And it's one of those things where very often, if you're organizing a conference, you're young yourself. You might be 18, 19, 20, and the delegates might be 16, 17. But equally, there is that safeguarding element that you do have to know about for the sake of safety, but also for the sake of legal aspects, for the sake of the comfortableness of the delegates themselves. So just a few things I want to mention, but equally, again, this is why planning ahead of time is important. If you're planning and you have all these things sort of checklisted in your mind during the conference, it'll be so much easier. Much better over-preparing for every possible eventuality than under-preparing and having to deal with it afterwards.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Philippe. Uni, do you have any comments?
I think Philippe covered most everything I wanted to say. But,
That's true.
Yeah, no, I also have good experiences with having one male and one female safe person as like a basis, even though of course like they won't be able to make like not everyone is going to feel 100% comfortable with every yeah but I think that's a good starting point. Other than that, I think
perfect. No, those are really good notes actually. Like for example, if the dryer breaks in the female bathroom and I need an organizer to go fix it, I would probably ask a female organizer to, contact someone, as they can actually go in their room and help them fix it or do whatever needs to be done. So there are, definitely different concerns. So thank you both for these comments. They were really, really interesting, really crucial to have. So the conference is over. What happens next? it's review time. So you may think once the final flights and trains have taken off and all the participants have gone, that you can kick back your feet and relax, but no, it is time for the review section. And this part is also really crucial not to skip. I know a lot of organizers may really want to take that break after the conference, but while it's fresh in your mind, it's really important to do the review. And part of this includes feedback from participants and speakers. And to get this feedback, you should allow an anonymous function for any negative or positive feedback, as people may feel, vulnerable, or they might not want to say it under their own name, especially any negative feedback. But likewise, if they want to say, any positive feedback under their own name, or any negative feedback under their own name, do allow for that. But also, the really crucial part is, just as the participants have listened to each other during the conference, that when they provide feedback to you, that you listen to any concerns, complaints, or compliments outlined, and really consider, is this a problem that we've been hearing about from all four corners? Is this something that we need to address? Is it something that only one group of people is having a difficulty with? And how can we make this better for them next time? And after you've collected, collated all the feedback, gather your team, your organizing team, for a serious discussion and reflections on the successes and failures of the conference. And in this review, you can write it up with notes and suggestions for future editions. And this is a gift to the next set of organizers to have that experience and be able to learn the lessons from your failures and successes, so that future editions can be even better. Evaluation is just as important as planning. And ideally, if you want to get into a cycle where the evaluation of the last part feeds right into the planning for the next part, then it's really essential to have that process that it just goes in a circle, including the handoff. So that is the end of the presentation. However, I would like to say that we have a full-length guide on MAB Connect Slack, and it has been offered by myself. I'm also available for any comments under my own name, with my email, which is Ciara.Campbell at I will share it. I will share it in the chat after. However, I would like to open the space up for any closing comments, questions, reflections, opinions from both Uni and Philippe. For myself, I have to say that it is a kind of whole process of, you break it down into planning, recruitment during the conference, and evaluation, which feeds nicely into itself, like a snake eating its own tail. However, it's really important to keep present at your mind in every part of this, that when it comes to AIDE, especially on such a day like Human Rights Day, that there are real people who are going to be affected. There are people who may have never been to another country. There are people who may have never met people of a certain type before this conference. And there are people who may arrive to your conference very shy and unknowing and leave knowing so much more and feeling so much more confident. And it's your duty as an organizer to support them and help them through every stage of the way, which is why we mainstream all these human rights concerns at every possible moment. So thank you all very much. And now I will open it back up to Uni or Philippe for any comments.
If I can just say one thing to keep in mind as well is, knowing in advance I would say that one of the small little mistakes I get sometimes, especially with new conferences, is take, for example, I know it's a very basic one. I don't mean to make this less, but allergens and allergies. People just aren't aware until the last moment, until food has come out, that people had certain issues with the food. And that's because they didn't really try to get that information beforehand. And that's a very small example of a larger problem, which is sometimes you are not equipped to also understand what specific, I would say, part you have to accommodate for. Um, you should by default be accommodating for everyone, but having that kind of data does also help to mainstream a lot of these initiatives across the whole of the organization. Because sometimes if you're in charge of, let's say, operations, you might be able to deal with operations, but you know might not be dealing with applications. You might not be specifically dealing with some aspects of the logistics, some aspects of the academics, but being able to have the information at the beginning, making sure the applications are receiving enough, making sure that is proliferated as well through the rest of the team is a really important one. So it really speaks to what Ciara was saying at the beginning. Mainstreaming is just a one-person job. It really is kind of across the whole team, and you want to make sure you're keeping it kind of in the forefront at every team meeting, even if the reporting of it is nothing more since last time we met. But it's important to keep it up there. And it is very important to try and teach the next generation of it what worked and what didn't. That is one of the hardest points because you are exhausted at the end of a conference. You're exhausted. You probably don't want to see some of you've been working with ever again after sort of 9 months or a year, just too much interaction with them. And it can be difficult to switch your brain back on and start writing something down. My recommendation for that is just make notes, make detailed notes, get examples, because those examples are what you leave. You might remember the generalities, but you might forget the specifics. So write as many specific bits down in a very random format and format them later into something that looks a bit better. But you really don't want to lose it because that is the gold dust that makes sure that every year after that gets better and better and better. And that's what we at MUNers Across Borders are trying to do with the entire community. Sprinkle this sort of gold dust around. This, if I could tell Ciara, is an absolute bit of gold dust. And every person who watches this will be really doing well to go even half the step of the way to the guide today. But of course, we challenge you to go all the way and continue to in all of your conferences. So thank you. And I guess Uni, over to you for the final word.
Yeah, I think you covered most topics, but I think just one thing that maybe hasn't been said is remember to also take note of what went well, because that's also it's often easy to focus on everything that went wrong, especially in the evaluation phase, especially if you're really sick of everyone you're working with. Really make an effort to look at what created value and what was the most successful parts of the conference, so that can be taken through the next year as well. And it is okay to want a break after the conference or after big events, but if you're doing that before you're having the evaluation session, maybe do a mini session every day during the conference. I've had good experiences with that, where you write down the specifics, like Luke said, like specific little tiny details throughout the day that you will definitely forget in even just a week. Let you have that, and so that you can take a break after the conference before you're forced to bring it all up again and keep working on it, even though you're really done. Yeah, just very small practical tips, but other than that, I think I just want to say thanks for tuning in, and thank you, Ciara, so much for this amazing little crash course. It was really lovely.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I would just like to say to everyone that if you have any questions, you can direct them to myself as the current training and resources officer. My email is Ciara, which is spelled Ciara, at worldmunday.com. So thank you all very much, and there will be more training sessions to come in 2025. Thank you.
Thank you.